Amazon's upcoming Middle-earth series is set to take place in the Second Age, one of the least explored eras of Tolkien's myth. And although these events take place thousands of years before The Lord of the Rings, there are still many ways Amazon's series could connect to the original trilogy. One of the original rumors swirling around Amazon's series claimed that the show would revolve around a young Aragorn. This was pretty exciting for Tolkien fans, as Aragorn's pre-Lord of the Rings story is replete with romance, drama, and action. At a young age, the king in exile loses his father, spends decades wandering in the wild, fights alongside Theoden's father and Rohan, saves Gondor from an attack while in disguise, and falls in love with Arwen over the course of 3 long decades. The Walking Dead's Tom Paine stirred the waters even more when he casually mentioned that the Amazon show was casting Aragorn. And then the news dropped that the series would be set during the Second Age, seemingly putting an end to any hopes of seeing Aragorn again. This is because although the Ranger is no spring chicken at 87 years young during the events of The Lord of the Rings, he's definitely not going to be walking around many thousands of years earlier. But there is still one chance. From day one, it's been reported that Amazon has the rights to a spin-off series along with their primary show. Maybe it's there that fans will reunite with the future King of Gondor? Gandalf's epic stand against the Balrog at the bridge of Khazad-dûm is one of the Lord of the Rings' most iconic scenes, and the ensuing duel on the peak of Silver Teen really is a battle for the ages. But while this fight has gone down in literary and cinematic legend, it raises one important question. Just where did this giant fire-breathing monster come from? Fortunately, the Amazon show has a chance to answer that very question. See, back in the first age of Middle-earth history, there were actually quite a few Balrogs, with Tolkien himself suggesting that there were, at most, 7 of these beasts running around and causing havoc. Most of them, however, were defeated and killed during the War of Wrath at the end of the First Age. As the Second Age begins, one of the Balrogs flees from this catastrophe, desperately searching for a place to hide. Eventually, it decides that it will bury itself deep in the subterranean passages under the Misty Mountains, near the dwarven kingdom of Khazad-dûm. There, the creature would remain in cozy anonymity for several thousand years, until far into the Third Age, when the dwarves would come across the last known Balrog during a mining expedition.
You know what they awoke in the darkness of Khazad-dûm. Shadow and flame.
If Amazon wants to connect their show to the original trilogy, what better way than to follow the origin story of Durin's Bane, the very Balrog that would eventually confront Gandalf in the Fellowship of the Ring? The elven Lady Galadriel has already made her presence known in The Lord of the Rings and featured heavily in Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy too. But that's not particularly surprising. After all, Galadriel is one of the oldest beings in Middle-earth, clocking in at over 8,000 years old during the original trilogy. Of course, that makes her an obvious candidate to play a major role in the Amazon show. It's a fact that the studio clearly is aware of too, since rumor has it that they already cast the character way back in late 2019. This will be an excellent way to tie the original movies in with the new streaming series. Galadriel is a mover and a shaker throughout the Second Age, showing up more than once and playing a pivotal role in the forging of the Rings of Power. But the production team can take Galadriel's role even further if they want to. This is because during the Second Age of Middle-earth, Galadriel visits Lórien for the first time. Now, that doesn't mean she gets her magic mirror and becomes the Lady of the Golden Wood right there on the spot, but she does pay her first visit to the woodland realm during the time that will be depicted in the show, providing an easy and satisfying excuse to take the audience on a stroll down memory lane. Anyone who's familiar with The Lord of the Rings will be very much aware of the terrifying powers of the Witch King of Angmar,
The one who will lead Mordor's armies in war. The one they say no living man can kill.
Sauron's chief lieutenant is the one who heads up the hunt for the One Ring, stabs Frodo on Weathertop, leads Mordor's attack on Minas Tirith, confronts Gandalf at the gates of the city, and ultimately dies in an epic duel with Éowyn. From beginning to end, the Witch King plays a pretty hefty role in the saga of the Third Age. But The Lord of the Rings is just his final act. In truth, the Witch King has a long and epic story that stretches way back into the Second Age. In The Return of the King, Gandalf refers to the Witch King as King of Angmar long ago, Sorcerer, Ringwraith, Lord of the Nazgul. Much of what Gandalf is referencing here harkens back thousands of years to when Sauron initially helped create the Rings of Power during the Second Age. When the Dark Lord gave 9 of these rings to the great leaders of mortal men, the chief of these was the King of Angmar. In the Silmarillion, it's even stated that Sauron was particularly successful in ensnaring 3 great lords of the Númenórean race, and it's likely that one of these was the Witch King himself. Considering it's been all but confirmed at least some of Amazon's series will take place on Númenor, it seems like it'd be more of a surprise if the Witch King didn't show up. When people think of Elrond, they typically picture a brooding elf, a grieving father, a ruminating counselor, and generally a bit of a downer. Seriously though, apart from a quick scrape with Nazgul in the Hobbit trilogy and some flashy leadership in the intro to the Fellowship of the Ring, Elrond is typically portrayed on the screen as a leader who doesn't often get his hands dirty. The thing is though, by the time of The Lord of the Rings, Elrond is thousands of years old. He was born at the end of the First Age and, as it happened, played a very hands-on role in the events of the Second Age. For example, Elrond is one of the few people who sees through Sauron's disguise when he helps the elves create the Rings of Power. He leads a portion of the armies that initially fight against the Dark Lord when he begins gathering said Rings of Power too, and even possesses one of the 3 elven rings to boot. At one point, Elrond's home Eregion is destroyed by Sauron's armies, and the elven lord retreats northward, where he establishes his own elven stronghold, a place he names Imladris, otherwise known as Rivendell. Elrond's new fortress holds out against Sauron and remains a key rallying point for the free peoples of Middle-earth for thousands of years to come. Elrond also plays a leading role in the Last Alliance and remains a dedicated warrior in the struggle against Sauron. As such, he's bound to have a pivotal role in Amazon's prequel series. Legolas Greenleaf is one of the most important yet underdeveloped characters in all of Tolkien's mythology. Despite being a key member of the Fellowship of the Ring, no one's quite sure how old he is, or just what he had really been up to before the original trilogy kicked off. At the end of the day, though, this could end up providing an unexpected boon for the team at Amazon Studios. The lack of backstory or history for the iconic Elven Prince offers up a great opportunity to work him directly into the primary narrative, without throwing things off from the source material. Now, it's worth pointing out that this has been done before, with mixed results. So yeah, Legolas's role in The Hobbit wasn't exactly a success, but with a little bit of respect and restraint, Amazon could nonetheless work him into their story and cement his status as a useful through line across the ages of Middle-earth's history. Hobbits might well be the most recognizable aspect of Tolkien's story, but strangely enough, they're nowhere to be found prior to the Third Age. In fact, they don't even arrive in their homeland of the Shire until 1600 years after the Second Age ends. Although a bunch of elves do occupy the same area for a while during that particular era. Sadly, this means that any meaningful part played by the good-hearted, hairy-footed people will have to take place in flash-forwards, unless the show eventually progresses into the Third Age itself. But that hasn't stopped Elijah Wood from voicing his willingness to cameo in the show, if they're willing to work in a role for him. He already did exactly that in the Hobbit films, appearing in a scene that jumps forward in time before the main story got rolling. If Amazon's team does follow Peter Jackson in framing their story around the stories of the Hobbits, it's bound to make a lot of fans very happy indeed. After all, who doesn't want to see the Shire again? The Dead Marshes are a pretty freaky place. This swampy, haunted marshland lies to the northwest of Mordor, stretching for miles and miles in every direction. This is the place where Frodo, Sam, and Gollum journey through on their way to Mordor, and it's also where Frodo has a rather unpleasant encounter with the ghostly apparitions of some fallen warriors. Eventually, the trio find their way out of the swamps and arrive at the Black Gate, leaving this strange and unsettling chapter firmly in the rearview mirror. So just where did these haunted swamps come from? Well, Fans of the books will know that the wetlands used to be much smaller and considerably less creepy. However, a huge battle was fought there at the end of the Second Age, during the War of the Last Alliance. Over time, the swamp spread out, swallowing up the graves of the fallen warriors, including orcs, elves, and men alike. Soon, the marshes had grown into a dark, haunted wasteland, one that was inspired by Tolkien's own experiences during the Battle of the Somme. But the growth of the dead marshes isn't just a deeply fascinating and unexplored part of the Middle-earth story. It's also yet another way that Amazon could connect the events of their show with the adventures of Frodo and the Fellowship. The ruins on top of Weathertop create the backdrop for one of Frodo's most harrowing adventures. In the Fellowship of the Ring, apparently abandoned by Aragorn and facing an attack from the Nazgul, Frodo and his hobbit friends seek protection by retreating to the ruins on the crest of the hill of Weathertop. There, they're attacked by 5 ring wraiths, and Frodo is stabbed with a poisoned blade before Aragorn arrives in the nick of time to save them. It turns out that ruin isn't just a heap of rubble, though. They're actually the remains of a fortress that was originally built thousands of years earlier, when Aragorn's Númenórean ancestors arrived in Middle-earth and established 2 new sister kingdoms, Gondor in the south and Arnor in the north. Weathertop is part of the Kingdom of Arnor, and the hill initially had a tower built on top of it, which acted as a key fortress of the Northern Kingdom. Not only is the fortress important, but it was also home to one of the 7 Palantiri, the same stones that Saruman and Sauron eventually steal and use to communicate in The Lord of the Rings. Weathertop becomes a much bigger deal in the Third Age, but it could nonetheless make a welcome return during the events of Amazon's series. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite movies are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.